I love your questions. They pierce right into a part of my brain and my heart and my soul that I'm like, oh, that's there. That's alive. She's not going to come. I just know it.
Did she not show up, or did she show up exactly as she is?
Deep down, the friendship was right in front of me the entire time.
Let's pretend she's this big pimple or this big boil. Sorry to say that. No offense to her. As a doctor, I'm just using this as an example. Let's pierce it, let's express it, and then be done with it so that it can heal.
Pretty proud of myself in that regard, that I looked at it very plainly and lovingly and said, I'm not going to walk away from this. This is who I am.
Some people love kiwi. What you feel about it and what I feel about it, that's the subjectivity. That is the emotion. The moment isn't what's bothering you. It's what you think or feel about the moment that is bothering you. Oh, that's right. We're recording.
Welcome to Simply Enough. This is Zachary and Elizabeth, and thanks for tuning in.
If you're liking our podcast, we'd love it if you'd share with your friends and family.
And then rate and review to raise our visibility and spread the message of enoughness.
We love you, and remember, you are simply enough.
Just as you are.
Period.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Simply Enough. I'm Mr. Zachary Leonard.
And I'm Dr. Elizabeth Ignacio.
Before we get into the episode, I just want to say I'm in a little bit of a different venue, just temporarily for today. And there's some weird sounds given that I'm right near a major street and everything. So listeners, viewers, if you hear any sirens or loud cars or anything, it's just a result of my environment. So I apologize if any of that is a little bit distracting, but I just want to put that out there to kick us off. So,
and really no need to apologize, Zachary. Such is life. It is what it is.
It is.
It's how we can approach many things in life. It is what it is. We'll just keep going.
So my wedding anniversary is coming up, and I was reminded about the actual day and thinking about everybody that I had or that we had with us at our wedding. And I was also, I wasn't prepared for this flush of emotions that I had about that particular day that I hadn't realized that I still had present. And that was, there was a very dear friend of mine that I went to graduate school with that I invited to the wedding. Now, we were paying for the wedding, so it was small. There was about 60 people. But this particular friend, I would say, was hot and cold with her level of commitment in terms of following through. And so I had sent this invitation out, hoping that she would come to the wedding. And she didn't make it. And she didn't really tell us why. And there's still a lot of kind of unresolved feelings there about why this person wasn't there. And I was really disappointed with that. And, so I was thinking about the date coming up, and this memory just kind of came back to me, just this feeling. And I remember actually for weeks after the wedding being really bummed and sad that this person wasn't there to celebrate this day, and that I had assumed that our relationship, our friendship, and the way that I had made this hope that the degree to which I thought our relationship was meant that she would be there, and then she wasn't. And not only that, but there was really no reason or acknowledgement of that. So I know it's a little bit of a wah, but I was kind of caught by it, and I wanted to bring it today. In just thinking about this moment in my life, and this weight, this heaviness around what I thought was going to happen, and then what actually happened, and how I was left feeling just bummed and disappointed and sad that this person wasn't there to celebrate with us. So,
may I, first of all, I'm so sorry. And this was how many years ago?
2009, so 13 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure that adds to it. And what I mean by adds to it is, I presume, but correct me if I'm wrong, this isn't something that you've necessarily thought of consistently over the past 13 years, but now with the date coming up again, it has surfaced.
And to your point, I hadn't it wasn't like every year it comes up, kind of like every year, June 21st is the day that I came out to my parents. There's kind of this anniversary moment, and I'm
Yeah.
somewhat brought back to that moment. It's not like that at all. It's actually been quite a few years since I've even spoken to this person or even thought about it. But in coming up to this particular date, I was just really just flushed in these complicated and heavy emotions.
And have you spoken to this person in the past 13 years?
Yes.
And have you brought up about the fact that she wasn't there?
I did. And I was still left unsettled. Uh,
What did you ask? May I ask? What what did you bring up?
I said, what happened? Why? First, just what happened with our wedding? What happened? And there was kind of a stumbling of this was going on in my personal life with my family and blah, 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 blah. Like, and honestly, I think I was so caught off guard with the fact that I even asked the question that I wasn't paying attention to the answer. So I was a little bit like, wow, look at you, like actually bringing this up. And so there was, my family, et cetera. And then I said, well, why didn't you even let us know that you couldn't make it? And then it was, well, I did let you know. I just sent it via this way. And I said, you didn't, or at least we didn't get it. And then, I tried calling you and emailing you, and I tried means to get a hold of you. And, I never got those. So there was a breakdown in communication. And that was ultimately where it was left settled, which was there was a lot in the personal life. And I tried, oh, you didn't hear from me. Oh, but I tried. And then, well, I tried. And, oh, I didn't hear that. Okay, well, here we are. So that was, and then kind of a resurgence of the friendship, like, oh, but we're back together now. And isn't it wonderful? And aren't we friends again? And I was now very much more guarded of like, okay, no, I don't think so. But that was like kind of just this moment and then dissipation, and we haven't really spoken since then.
Yeah. So authentically, can I ask you, how do you feel about maintaining the friendship?
No, I mean, I'm not invested in maintaining it.
So, and that's okay.
Yeah.
That you're allowed to feel that way, and in doing so, and given that there's really no interest, if we're looking at what's the end game, what's the outcome that you'd like and that you'd want, is it that you want the friendship to be back to what it used to be? And is it, if it's not back to the friendship that it used to be, is it even back to a friendship?
No.
Okay. So, relative to these very real, authentic feelings that you're feeling about that memory, what do you think that's about? Is it really about her, or is it just, and I don't mean just to minimize it or be reductive. Um, uh, are the feelings that are welling up about her in particular?
That's a good question.
Because if it is, then I'm just going to pose, at the end of the day, why does it matter if it's about her? And that's where, going back to prior episodes of, what she did was the snake bite. Any resentment that comes from it is the poison that circulates within you, unbeknownst to her. Not even unbeknownst, but even once you let it be known, it didn't seem to affect her in any way, and that it was just let's resume as it used to be. It's truly just the poison within you. What is keeping you from letting go and expunging the poison?
I love your questions because they just like pierce right into a part of my brain and my heart and my soul that I'm like, oh, that's there. That's alive. In a way that I also haven't considered, which is why I do appreciate the question as well. I would say it isn't really about her. I think I can say that for sure. And then I also think an acknowledgement of a moment that I wanted a friend to show up for me,
Mm-hmm.
and the disappointment that she didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And not just about her, but in a very real moment of those times in which that has happened many times to me. Uh, and that one just serves as kind of a strong example of all of these other mini examples as well.
And that's okay. I mean, that's words don't teach. It's experiences that we learn from. And so she happens to be the most amplified lesson. Therefore, though, so let's pretend she's this big pimple or this big boil. Sorry to say that. No offense to her, but I'm just, as a doctor, I'm just using this as an example, which is let's pierce it, let's express it, and then be done with it so that it can heal. Yes. Yeah. So looking at her as the individual example or the individual lesson, can I pose to you to consider? I'm not saying she was, I can't help but wonder, might part of the hurt, if not all of the hurt, be that not just in that instance, but that instant was actually a reflective of the whole, meaning what is hurting or disappointing you is that she wasn't the friend that you thought that she was overall. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is, clearly this big moment in your momentous occasion in your life, she wasn't there for. Might you consider honestly and reflectively, and not defending her and not wanting to scratch the surface and see it for what it was, might that friendship not have been the friendship that you thought it was? And therefore, in some ways, did she not show up for your wedding, or did she show up exactly as she is, meaning she didn't show up?
It's funny you say that. I do, because when we mailed out her invitation, I have to tell you, I said to my husband, I said, she's not going to come. I just know it. And then I was almost like preparing in a way, like I was already mad at her. You know what I mean? Like writing her name on the invite, like I know she's not going to come. I just know it. And I'm like, but yes, I think to like open that boil or that pimple. No, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. I think it was really a reflection on the friendship and what I knew about the friendship all along. Yes.
And you didn't want to. Yes. And that's that inner struggle and that inner angst. Yet deep down, that inner GPS that we've talked about in previous episodes, you knew. Mm-hmm. So she showed up exactly as the friendship is for your wedding, meaning she didn't show up and you knew it. And that's not to put like blame, shame, like, see, I told you so, Zachary. It's more actually, again, to relieve you of that burden, to release and express the pus out of that pimple and that boil, to just see it for what it is. So much of hurt, especially from relationships, doesn't necessarily come from the fact that the relationship is over and I miss that person. You don't really miss that so-called friend. What you might be grieving is the idea of what you believed that friendship to be, or that idea of the belief of what you thought that relationship was. Yeah. But when we peel away, it actually wasn't, then that actually relieves you of the burden of trying to preserve and miss and grieve something that wasn't fine, what you wanted it to be. But in recognizing, okay, well, that's what I wanted it to be and it wasn't that, then it is what it is. And I don't mean to say that flippantly or dismissive, but that is in fact life, which is when we recognize it is what it is, not deny it, not put a happy face sticker on it, but also not live there and lament it and grieve it. That's how one moves on. That's how one learns, and takes the tuition that these lessons are in the school of life, and move from that.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if this is a tangent or not, but it's certainly what you're saying connected with what 15, 14-year-old Zachary thought as he was recognizing that he was different and a member of the queer community, is like, this is just who I am. It is what it is. And the acceptance of it for somebody so young, I would say I'm pretty proud of myself in that regard, that I just looked at it very plainly and lovingly and said, this is that I'm not going to walk away from this. This is who I am.
Yes.
So
it is what it is. Many people know that I forgot who said it, but the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome or a different result, right? Well, stress is wanting something to be what it isn't. You see what I'm saying? That and stress is many things. I'm not saying that's the only definition of stress, but that's where a lot of stress in one's life comes from, is wanting something to be what it isn't. Mm-hmm. Whether it's a situation, an event, or a person or a relationship. And that resistance that comes in wanting and wishing and willing it to be what it's not, that resistance is that stress, whether it manifests in terms of blood pressure and heart rate, or whether it results in emotional wounds and trauma and anxiety and depression. That willfulness and that wishing for something to be what it's not, and it's already declared itself and shown up as itself to not be what that is, yet hoping, wishing, willing it to be something different. That's where that stress comes from.
Oh, for sure. And
and you're when you're 14 and 15 and you are I am who I am, and it is what it is. It is simple, it is objective. But again, the stress comes from the subjective. The objective is it is what it is. That moment, that relationship, that person, that scenario. It's not I think it's Michael Singer. He wrote The Untethered Soul. He said, the moment in front of you isn't what's bothering you. You're bothering yourself about the moment in front of you. Right?
Oh my God.
The moment itself is objective. And, in the previous episode, we talked about interpretation versus translation, and interpretation is very, very subjective. That's exactly what this is. The moment in front of you isn't what's bothering you. The moment is just the fact. The moment is what it is. And what one person's translation or one person's interpretation of that moment is going to be very different from you. Kiwi. Some people love kiwi. Kiwi is a fruit. That's the objective moment about it. Kiwi sitting here in front of you and me. You love kiwi. You think it's fantastic. It's one of the best fruits. It's well worth the exorbitant price. You can tell how I think about kiwi. The kiwi is objective. Your feelings on that, oh, it's great. It's well worth the price. Purely because of my biochemistry, kiwi actually is very offensive to me. It's not just that I don't like it. It's offensive to me. Kiwi is objective. What you feel about it and what I feel about it, that's the subjectivity. That is the emotion. That is where the moment isn't what's bothering you. It's what you think or feel about the moment that is bothering you. So that the kiwi is to that point in terms of it's the moment in front of you isn't bothering you or me. It's what we bring to the table. The moment in front of you isn't bothering you. It's what we feel or think about the moment that we're bothering ourselves about that moment.
It just funny that you bring up kiwi, because I know cilantro is that way for a lot of people too. Some people think it tastes like soap. I'm not one of those people. And those people are like, I don't want to see an ounce of cilantro anywhere. And I know we're going off a food tangent here, but it's still relevant to exactly what you're saying.
Right.
And given the story that we launched this episode with, absolutely the stress of knowing, well, let me just say, we sent out the invitation and I think knew what the relationship was, and then was trying to believe it to be something else and believe it to be something else. And all of that came into it, and the stress of checking the mail. Is it going to come? Is her response going to come? Is it going to be there? Is she going to come? Is she going to? All of that, when really deep down the friendship was not the friendship that I wanted it to be. Right. Was right in front of me the entire time.
The entire time. And you knew it, actually. And so at the end of the day, it is what it is, and it is what it's been. You just didn't want it to, you just didn't want that to be the case out of your love and friendship and wanting to think the best of her. And, I shouldn't even say that. So I'm not even going to say, well, you want to think of the best of her, and she's a bitch. Like, that's just who she is. We all have our own backstories.
Mm-hmm.
We all have the way that we relate to the world. It just wasn't a fit. But there's been a consistency, probably, I presume, a consistency to how she shows up. And that's why you knew that she wasn't going to physically show up, but you wanted it to be different. Yet it is what it is. And she showed up right on time by not showing up. Right. And now the feelings that are welling up about the anniversary and the recollection and the memory, I'll use the word memory, of her not being there, if you can reframe it as to lesson learned, and therefore you have wisdom gleaned, as is every moment in life. Every moment is an opportunity to learn. Wisdom gleaned from that memory. Well, what is wisdom? Wisdom is memory without emotion.
I shared this, I think, in the last episode, just gratitude for the opportunity to take an experience and then have a new perspective, a new interpretation on it based on, what we talked about last episode. In this case, the recollection of the memory now, if we look at it back at like that pimple, that pus, like rather than being like, ew, right? Like that's there. And it's actually helpful for me to get this out and to get this away from me, and then to also take some learning back from it. So originally, you're right. I went through this and I was these memories again, and this emotion of being really just hurt and disappointed, but also like, now what a gift, because I can look at it more objectively. I can look at it without emotion. And then I can also take that learning and apply it to maybe other relationships that I have that are similar and actually demonstrate similar qualities. So
yes. And how wonderful in that it relieves you, it expressed that pus. Boy, our listeners and our viewers are going to love this. Sorry, it's the doctor in me, everybody. And I know that's very universal and relatable, to everybody about acne and the pus and everything. But so not only were you able to express that and now heal from that, but you're not healing from it by denial or pushing down. You're not even healing by having resentment towards her and placing her in this vein of what a bitch that she didn't show up.
Right.
You actually also, in giving yourself space and grace, you are, for the better, giving her space and grace of being like, that's just who she is. And I'm not saying that with disdain, like, well, that's just who she is.
Right.
Just literally with grace and compassion, that's who she is. And whatever is her backstory and life experience, this is how she relates to the world. And in her mind, because of her backstory and the shoes that she wears, she may truly feel sincerely she is a good friend to you. And that's okay on her part. And whether or not that is we talked about this in previous episodes, your definition or standards of friendship, that might not mesh, and that's okay. But at least now there is that release and grace of emotion and hurt from that, and yet gleaned wisdom, because it's now memory without emotion. And if I may also say, only because this is a recent conversation I had with another person, it is okay. It's quite natural, really, to have different, I'll say, degrees of friendship. I don't want to say classes of friendship. That sounds so classist, but there's just different degrees of friendship. Why? Because there's different degrees of intimacy, and there should be different. And I hate the word "should," but there ought to be different degrees of intimacy, because not everybody gets that privilege of getting to know another person to the same depth that isn't universal for everybody, because intimacy is in fact that it's intimate, and therefore not everybody gets to know that depth of you, nor do we get to know that depth of other people. The reason why I specifically bring this up is I have a friend of mine who I was teasing in terms of rapidity or quickness to respond to texts.
Okay.
And I was teasing this person, and he was saying, that there's actually different levels of responsiveness to respond to another person's text. And he was joking, and he's quite reserved.
Okay.
And he doesn't listen to the podcast, but if he were to listen, he knows exactly who I'm talking about. And Gracie, you know who I'm talking about. This person can be perceived as Grinch-like, though his heart is of gold. Gracie knows who I'm talking about. And, and his wife is so warm and so open. And so he was saying how his wife chastises him about how he will respond to certain friends this way, and not ghost per se, but not respond as rapidly to other people. And shouldn't he respond the same? Because for this friend, will drop everything to be for that, to be there for that person. And for this person, you don't respond for like a day. And in giving him space and grace, and giving the Grinch space and grace. I'm laughing because I know he doesn't listen to this podcast. That would be far too vulnerable and emotional for him to listen to this podcast. But, in giving him space and grace, of course there are gradations. But when I say gradation, it's not because you're then judging this other person to whom you don't respond as quickly. That's a bad person and that's not deserving of me. But that's just human condition, that people are going to have different degrees of intimacy with other people, and it's okay that it's not a one size fits all friendship. Mm-hmm. So even again, for this person who didn't show up, maybe you would grab a beer with her and hang out with her with an evening and catch up with her once a year, that kind of thing. But the level of friendship that you thought there was never there. And now you know that. And so now it's not a, piss on you, I hope you die in hell. It's not that, but it's also boil. You boil, but it's also not like, if I'm ever having yet another momentous event in my life, you're not going to be on the invite list, not as a punitive measure, but just as an objective reflection of it is what it is. And now I know. Mm-hmm.
It's actually really insightful. And I think I do often approach relationships with this idea of like, you are going to be a close friend or you are just an acquaintance, that there are really no gradations in between. I have since started to learn that there are certain friends for certain things. I like to rock climb. So I've got my rock climbing friends and I've got my, but they're often hobby driven. And I think I use that as an indication of the level of regard of the friendship or whatever. But thank you for that acknowledgement, because it also, to go back to your statement about wisdom is memory without emotion. Yeah, I probably could have a drink with her now. Like I do feel like, I understand my terms on the relationship. She's fun to hang out with. So yeah, maybe I could get a drink. So actually, like, I don't know. Thank you.
Isn't it liberating? And on the flip side too, not that the outcome always has to be, sure, I'll welcome everybody, and there's different gradations. Recognize too that in that continuum, there is that element where you opt or choose to unemotionally not interact again.
Yep.
And the presence of that person in your physical space. So let's say you happen to be at the same party or gym or grocery store or whatever, can be in your physical space, but you no longer have the emotional trigger of, oh, I got to get out of here, or, oh, now I got to invite this person to dinner. The emotion actually has been removed because you now just recognize it is what it is. And with it being it is what it is, again, doesn't always mean that, okay, now that there is no emotion, I can hang, and grab a beer with her and hang for, an evening. It can be unemotionally, and I'm just going to walk on by, but not with disdain. And it's not punitive. And I'm not trying to make a statement. And I'll show him that we're not friends anymore. There's actually just no trigger whatsoever. There's no emotion to it.
I am a huge Jane Austen fan, which I don't know that I've disclosed on the podcast yet. I think I've maybe I've kept that a little bit of a secret.
Why?
I
It
don't know.
shows you're evolved. No, I'm joking. That's judgmental on my part. Clearly, I have my bias because I love Jane Austen.
Love Jane Austen. Persuasion is my favorite of all of the Austen books, but they published Persuasion after she died. Many believe that, and maybe I'm just biased because I like it so much. Many believe that like this is Austen writing about herself, that she is Anne Elliot, right? And so this is like our opportunity to see how she sees herself, and that she wasn't as regarded as her sister, and is kind of the underdog heroine, and all these things. And so people,
well, that's always her. That's even Elizabeth in Pride and Prejudice, right? Is the brainiac, the articulate one, not the beautiful one per se. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but
no, you're right.
Yeah, I love Austen.
Yes. And so anyway, so I often read Persuasion once a year, and I decided to read Sense and Sensibility, which I had never read before, which I'm surprised by because I love the Emma Thompson adaptation directed by Ang Lee with Kate Winslet and Hugh Grant and everything. But anyway, so the point of all this is I got to the end when Marianne is talking with Eleanor about her feelings about Willoughby. And she talks about essentially what you're saying, which is she could now be in the same room with Willoughby and no longer have that kind of swell of emotion. She thinks she could, right? We don't know, but we assume, we take her at her word. She says she thinks she could be in the same room, not have that same swell of regret and sadness for the loss of the relationship, and that she actually now doesn't have the same emotional connection with it, and doesn't place the same energy on him and the relationship in the same way. So now that there's the distance, and I would say to your point about wisdom, there's even wisdom associated with that, which she attributes to her sister Eleanor, that she had it all along, that she just didn't have until that moment. So anyway, the point of all of that was to just say, even in this book that I'm reading, it's exactly that. And a literary example of this idea that you were sharing so beautifully about you don't necessarily have to invite them to your table. But if you do, with clarity of relationship and clarity of understanding, it doesn't necessarily evoke the same emotional reaction if there's a discordance between the way the relationship is and maybe your hope or idea or expectations about it. Does that make sense?
Exactly. Absolutely.
Sorry, that was
so
long
you
for
show
me.
up differently. No, that was awesome. And there you were channeling, and therefore you show up differently because you're not coming with these, expectations or these emotions. And that's not to say that you're a robot devoid of emotion, but it just means that you're showing up differently, and thus actually might be able to enjoy the experience that much more for recognizing it as it is.
Yes.
Not as what you wish it would be, hoped it would be, would like it to be, prefer it to be, remember it to be. Because now you're not remembering it in a way that you prefer. It's memory without emotion. Thus, it is what it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pimple popped? Boil expressed?
Totally. I can't believe I brought up Jane Austen. And
And when you brought up Jane Austen, by the way, I was so into it that when you brought it back, I'm like, oh, wait, we're recording the podcast.
Oh.
I was so deep into talking to you about Jane Austen that I'm like, oh, you're bringing this back to the podcast. Oh, that's right. We're recording. I literally had to check and say like, oh yeah, recording. Sorry, everybody.
No. But the funny thing is I could keep going. And to your point, so there's an earlier moment. Okay. So forgive me, but there's an earlier moment when she hasn't heard from Willoughby in a long time. And now they're in London, and she sends him all these, this is Marianne, and she sends him all these letters. He doesn't respond to any. They end up getting invited to this ball. They go to the ball and he's there, and she freaks out, right? She's like, Willoughby, right? And then the way that they capture it in the movie is like, I think a pretty good alignment with the book. To your point of like, okay, now she's bringing all that energy, right? All that angst of, I haven't heard from you. Mm-hmm. I think you love me, and I know that I love you, and I expect us to be engaged, and all of that, which we talked about in another episode, right? Like you actually should point the finger back at yourself. She pushes all that towards him, and at the end of the book reflects about her own actions. In addition, her own acknowledgement that she suspected somewhat all along that he wasn't actually interested in her, that his motives were purely self-serving. So even Marianne has the same situation that I had with my
deep down, she knew.
Deep down, she knew. She knew.
And Willoughby, your friend, showed up as they've been showing up. And that's why you knew, but you didn't want that. So you put on these rose-colored glasses, wanting the friend and the friendship to look a certain way.
Yep.
So ironically, your friend was actually being quite authentic.
Yes.
Showing up right on time, the way the friendship has been. But you're putting meaning on what you wanted that friendship to be like, and expectations of what you wanted her to be and show up as. That's where the hurt comes in.
Yep.
And that's where the stress comes in, as opposed to it is what it is. Space and grace for yourself, recognizing what you wanted it to be. Space and grace for the other person showing up as however that person shows up because of the shoes that they wear, the life experiences that they've lived. It is what it is.
It is what it is.
Pimple popped.
Okay, so before we totally say goodbye, I just got to say, so there are two things that Elizabeth says. The first is that she doesn't like to kick off an episode and she doesn't like to wrap up an episode. But what I have come to find is that she's actually excellent at both, because that summary was just lovely in the way that you just brought it all together and then just put a little pimple button on the top of it.
Little pimple popper right there.
Any last thoughts?
Just that I love you. I love our listeners and our viewers, because thank you, everybody. We are seeing an uptick in our listeners, our viewers. Please keep subscribing, because the subscribing helps our reach. And I do think that we're all in this together, and that we all have similar universal experiences and feelings and thoughts to share, especially now because of COVID and the pandemic. So let's keep spreading the word. And thank you to our listeners and our viewers for helping us spread this word of simply enoughness.
That's a great reminder, because also we have our website, simplyenough.me. And then we have an email address, info@simplyenough.me. Share your stories with us.
Please.
Feel free to engage with us. It doesn't have to necessarily be on social media. You can write to us directly via a form on our website at simplyenough.me, or send us an email at info@simplyenough.me and let us know. Maybe some of these stories have resonated with you and you have stories to share. We would love to hear from you.
Yes.
What were you going to say?
No, that's it. Perfect.
That's it. Okay. Well, remember, you are simply enough.
Just as you are. Period.
Love you.
Love you too. Bye, everybody. Mwah. Bye.